This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, I am very excited to have a very interesting person on the show. We're going to be spending a lot more time with him, but today we're going to be talking about the 2008 financial crisis and what happened in home mortgages. Now, the person we're going to be speaking to is very important because they were at the scene of the crime. They used to work at Countrywide Mortgage. Now, this company was giving out mortgages to anybody with a pulse, and I'm convinced a few people that weren't. And so we're going to find out from the inside what was going on in the mortgage business leading up to the 2008 crisis, and how that has left our country broke and bereft. So and has screwed over my entire generation so that we will be poor for the rest of our lives. So I have always wanted to talk to somebody at this level of involvement in the financial crisis. I tried for years to get Dick Fold from Lehman Brothers to come on and never got an answer back. Can't imagine why. I would think he would be eager, but instead today we're going to be talking with Wade Fransson. He used to work at Countrywide, and we're going to find out what was going on in there. So welcome, Wade, to the Cameron Journal Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. So let's spin the clock back to 2007. I was 19 years old, going to college and thinking I had a great, profitable life ahead of me. And I had no idea what was coming or how it would completely upend my whole life. And when it comes to the financial crisis, I have spent my life really studying that to try to understand what happened and how my life ended, because I went to college in 2007 thinking that I was going to, walk into a job and things were going to be great. And by the time I left undergrad in 2009 or grad school in 2011, I all but had a scarlet letter H on my chest. So, and then fast forward many years, and I wrote a book called America's Lost Generation about that experience and how it affects other people. And so why don't you start from the beginning and tell us a little bit about how you got in at the infamous Countrywide Mortgage Company and what you did there, and then we'll get into the dirty.
Absolutely. And I always like to go way back to the beginning. So I'm going to just do a very, very quick romp through really how I ended up there. My father's an immigrant who came from Sweden and was a manual laborer at first, learned the skill of welding, and then began to invest his money in real estate. His dream was to become a millionaire. He actually never made it. He's still alive, by the way. Recently had his first ever hole-in-one in retirement. He's happy. But he did do some dabbling in real estate investment. He flipped a few properties. He bought a corner lot, sold it to a gas station, was doing quite well for a while. So that kind of gave me the bug as to why to be interested. He eventually lost, not because of bad real estate decisions, but because of other life choices that led to difficult situations. But I was always interested in real estate. I always knew that that was a way you could, as an individual, secure your financial future without necessarily any other skills. There are these books out there no money down, right? No money down for the 2000s, where using other people's money and leverage, you can buy your way into real estate for a small amount of money. And now you have financial leverage because as the real estate appreciates, your initial investment can grow thousandfold. And so you don't have to be the smartest guy on the block to get into an early Apple or an early Microsoft. You just buy a nice piece of real estate for a very small amount of down payment, and then you ride the appreciation to 1,000% because you're only putting in this much money on this much asset, right? So
Right.
that's an underlying reason why real estate is a good way to speculate, right?
Of
Now you
course.
have now you have regulation which seeks to limit that speculation. And it's the aggregation of that speculation that ultimately got us into the problem that we're here describing today. But for me personally, I had this interest in real
We'll
estate.
come back to that. Let's put a
Yeah,
little pin in that. We'll come back to that.
yeah. So I ended up then, perhaps because of my interest in real estate and technology, getting a job with CB Richard Ellis. CB Richard Ellis is the largest commercial real estate services provider, still is. And while there, I had to
They
sell
are everywhere.
technology.
You see their signs hither, thither, farther, and
Exactly,
yon.
CBRE, right? CB Commercial merged with Richard Ellis. Anyway, um, because I had to sell real estate services from a brokerage company, I had to get a real estate license out in California.
Mm.
When I left CB to go to Deloitte because of technology, that's where I learned a lot about accounting practices. I studied Enron, WorldCom, and I learned that off sheet real estate transactions are often a way to commit corporate fraud. If you dig into WorldCom and Enron, you'll see that real estate was at the heart and core of those meltdowns as well. Why? Because real estate represents a large number on the balance sheet, and you can play games with the costs associated with that. That's perhaps for another show as well. I have written about some of that in my second book called The Hardness of the Heart, to put in a little plug there. So then I left Deloitte and joined Countrywide in 2004. And the role that I played at Countrywide was strategic planning for their corporate real estate facilities and the integration of technology to manage those facilities. So, kind of what I had been doing at Deloitte, I was now doing for an up and coming company. And Countrywide was growing rapidly. They were headquartered in Calabasas, California, and I was part of the strategic planning community. So I had insight into how they were growing the business, including the subprime lending division, which you alluded to earlier, in which if it breathed, it could get a mortgage, right? While there, I did location strategy as well. So I was researching all the areas of the United States where Countrywide might put its big box facilities to have 10,000 employees and looking at all the data around cost of doing business, um, energy costs of facilities, and then space planning, working with human resources to expand their employee base from 30 to 60, and then 120,000 was a goal at one time. Countrywide was also expanding its portfolio of services. And this is a critical point to understanding what was going on at Countrywide. In addition
Hmm.
to subprime lending, which was the big, boogeyman, they were also doing wholesale lending. So they were buying large blocks of mortgages from companies like, uh, mortgage originators, including, and now I'm having a brain freeze, of course, the big bad ugly one. Um, it'll come to me. But they were buying literally, hundreds of millions of dollars of paper wholesale as part of their wholesale lending division. And in
Right.
order to finance this, this is really interesting. Countrywide launched CFC Bank, and Countrywide was really quite ingenious in how they did this. In order to launch a bank, you have to have a vault, which is expensive, and you're regulated heavily. But there was another way of being regulated, and there was another way of not having a vault. Countrywide took deposits or excuse me, Countrywide did not technically take deposits at their bank. they had a FedEx drop box, and the deposits went in the FedEx drop box. Ergo, they weren't literally taking deposits at their bank. So this allowed them to rapidly scale up their bank outlets across the United States. Why? To suck in money, and they could offer higher percentage rates on their certificates of deposit than a bank that had all these other expenses. So they were pulling in cash through Countrywide Bank. They were pulling in massive amounts of mortgages. They were issuing subprime mortgages as well as their standard lending. And then they implemented a trading floor in the basement of their Calabasas facility. And they had 200 traders literally creating that sausage, right, of these tranches of mortgages, packaging them up and selling mortgage-backed securities. So Countrywide, as it was growing, was involved in all aspects of this. This is one reason why it was legitimate that Time Magazine in January 2009 put Angela Mazzillo on the cover as the number one cause of the economic meltdown. You could have put other
I
names on
didn't
there.
realize. I knew about them. I'll say this. Let me vamp for you for a moment.
Yep.
I knew about the mortgages. I never knew that they were also an investment bank, basically. Um, because all our attention was in New York at
Oh, and I
Lehman
don't
and
know that I
Bear
don't know
and
I don't
Merrill and
well, no, I don't know that they were technically an investment bank. I'd have to go
oh,
refresh
I'm
my
sure
memory.
technically they weren't, but they were acting like one.
They had a trading floor where they could trade those and they could help, figure out all angles of packaging up those securities.
Well, and I'm sure, I mean, in terms of, you package them and sell them to investors, that investor can be a man on the street. It also can be an institution.
Right.
Um, and this is one of the issues I've always had with this business is, and I got into an argument with my dad about this, about derivatives. And and I said, we need to regulate this. And he's like, well, why shouldn't I be able to, make a bet on some other economic activity? I'm like, I don't mind if you do. I mind very terribly if the California State Teachers Pension Fund is doing that type of business. That's a big problem. I matter that, that there are, towns that are being bankrupted by interest from this business that was done by people who are not sophisticated investors who have no clue what this stuff actually means. Um, and that is one of the things that I feel like that's where you kind of, look at this stuff and be kind of like, who, and I guess this is the next question to start the conversation. Who thought any of this was a good idea? Like, wasn't there somebody at some point who stood up and
Everybody,
been like, this isn't good? Like,
everybody who wanted to make a quick buck thought it was a good idea. So let's talk about the other players.
what about the
Everybody
slow
from
dollar? Was anybody wanting to make slow dollars to say, hey, I don't think this is a good idea and
well,
this could be a problem at some point?
so let me talk about a few more players in the complex web, right? So you also had, for example, in the frothy real estate markets like Vegas and other places where you had a lot of speculative real estate going on. Um, there were fraudulent institutions appraising these properties, right? For and there were fraudulent real estate agents and brokers who were allowing homes to be falsely appraised and getting kickbacks on the extra money that was being generated on the delta between what the home was worth and what it was selling for. You also had um, other people in other areas of the industry who were just making money hand over fist, right? So there was a complicit blind eye being played. The ratings agencies who were rating what's the risk, who were rating the risk, right? That's a well-known one. All kinds of people were complicit because you had this massive asset inflation and a lot of different species of pigs at the trough. There's one
Right.
more I'd like to highlight, and this is what really got me thinking that this wasn't just good old fashioned American capitalism, why not? But that it was actually evil. And here's what almost I've never heard anyone else point this out about Countrywide. I had access to know that they had 1.3 trillion with a T in mortgage servicing rights. What does that mean? What it means is when they securitized this and sold off the risk so that other people were carrying the risk of whether or not the mortgage performed, whether or not the owner could pay the mortgage at the granular cellular level of all the people that had their mortgages in this paper that was being sold to the proverbial pension fund in Norway. Um, when they sold off the risk, the thing they chose to keep was the servicing rights on the mortgage. Now, Angelo Mozilla was a smart guy. He grew up knowing that mortgage is a bust and boom industry. And if you're going to turn your little mortgage business into a sustainable corporate giant that has you standing on Wall Street ringing the bell because you sit on top of our gargantuan business, you need to hedge your bets so that when the mortgage bust happens, you don't go bankrupt, right? And so the servicing rights were a hedge within Countrywide against the mortgages imploding. Why? Because when do you make money on servicing rights? When people are going into foreclosure. That's when you can rack up massive fees on each individual mortgage. So one of the facilities that I was looking into, finding out where they should locate 10,000 people was for the loan administration department. Why did they need 10,000 people to administer loans that they had sold the paper on? Because they retained the servicing rights. So they were actually betting on this thing imploding, and the servicing rights on all this bad paper was for them the life raft. And this, I decided, was pure evil.
I have never said this before in the 10 almost 15 years I've worked in media. This is the only time I've done an interview where I've wanted a Tylenol. I have a headache. This is again, common sense is not that common. How does nobody of all the people, someone late at night, is just like, I don't think this is a good idea?
But it was a good idea. It was security, right? It was brilliant because now they had a hedge. It
Right,
was a
but that's
low.
as dumb as AIG buying up everybody's CDO from
Well,
Wall
well, well,
Street
well. No,
and then needing $90 billion bailout.
no, for Countrywide, it was smart because it was a low margin business. You could make a slight profit on it. You're hiring all these low, cost workers to manage all these mortgages, the payment processing. But if and when everything explodes, suddenly that's a money minting machine that helps you offset the loss of new mortgage underwriting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for Countrywide, it was a very good business idea. But it's this. But what was also going on was Angela
But
Mazzillo
I
himself.
also feel like that's also creating a system that is going to lead to failure because you're banking on that failure to make you money. Like, this is a follow the money. If the bad thing happening is going to make somebody money or make you money, it seems to me there's everything starts to get morphed into making the bad thing happen so the money can be made. And I think this is unconscious. I don't think if you asked someone on the street who
I
was doing this, hey, you're actively trying to make a bad thing happen to make money, they would never admit it because it's subconscious.
right. I
Everything
agree.
just kind of moves in that direction.
I agree with you in principle 100%. I don't think the specific logistical mechanics of this bet delivered that or were the cause of that. But I agree with you 100% in theory and just this particular business unit it
Right.
wasn't that kind of a thing. It was just a hedge. It was just a hedge, and it wasn't the goal. It wasn't the end game. But it certainly was
Well, and it
an
also made it
insurance
attractive to
policy.
investors because they didn't have to deal with the mortgages.
Well,
You can
exactly,
invest, get
exactly.
paid for this, and we'll deal with the mess of collecting the payments and throwing people out when they don't pay. We'll
It's
deal with the
really
mess. You just give us the money.
it's really helpful to think in terms of something more innately physical and practical, like the slaughtering of an animal, right? You've got in in that area of agriculture, they use every part of the animal, right? Some they use the fat for one thing, they use the meat for something else, they use the bones for something else, they use the organs for something else. You know what I mean?
Right.
Nothing goes to waste in a big. And so Countrywide found a way to ride this one piece that other people weren't paying attention to. But the really super obvious point about what you're saying is that Angelo Mazzillo himself filed with the SEC his standard stock selling program, right? And he was dumping, you know, I think it was $2.5 million worth of his stock per week. And you go watch some of those movies, like The Big Short and other movies like that talk about this aspect of it. And the people that were onto this could see that Angela and the message boards were lighting up with the fact that he was unloading his stock while telling people that the stock was, well priced and there was further upside. But anyone with half a brain knew, no, this guy is selling as much as he can, as fast as he can. And throughout the whole last year before the thing collapsed and Countrywide stock tumbled from in the upper 60s down to $6 a share when B of A bought the company. Angelo Mozillo was already a billionaire because he had unloaded much of his stock during that last year and a half while he was up ringing the bell on Wall Street, telling everybody there's more legs to this market and Countrywide is sound. And there was, again, a degree of truth because he had this massive hedge in the servicing rights to weather the storm. Sure, there would be layoffs. Um, I have a humorous story that I can share about Countrywide that an outsider wouldn't know that I find also telling if you'd like, that has little to do with the big picture, but talks about the culture and what was going on inside the company.
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
So in my role with technology, I was also involved in outsourcing, right? So we were looking to this unit was being built in Countrywide. It was a captive outsourcing called CFC India. So for back office processes, we wanted our own offshore lower cost people. And one of the functions that was outsourced was the HR service center. So as Countrywide was growing from 30 to 60,000 employees, if you had something to say to HR, you would get somebody in India. Now,
That's great.
simultaneously,
You've gotten fired by a man named Sanjeep.
right. Well, no, you didn't. He didn't fire you, but Sanjeev will listen to you complain about how you got fired. So, but it's but it's even better than that, right? So while this was going on as part of a cost reduction measure, because as you start adding employees, size and scale, you also have ability to economize. Traditionally, they had Krispy Kreme donuts delivered at the close of every month because they were a mortgage origination business, right? So they had these long hours to close all the mortgages at the end of the month, and they delivered Krispy Kreme donuts. And this was a company perk that all employees got, whether you were in mortgage underwriting or not. It was just part of the company culture, the Krispy Kreme donuts. And so they decided to cut the Krispy Kreme donuts, right? Obviously for expense reasons. But instead of telling the employees, look, it no longer makes sense for us with 60,000 employees to be giving donuts to everybody that used to be for the mortgage people. So we're just going to cut that. No, no, no. They couldn't be honest about it. So they said, this is a health initiative, right? So we're gonna help you by taking away your donuts, because you obviously don't have the self-control. But it was obviously a lie because they didn't give you an apple instead. They just took away your donuts. So
Right.
they made this decision at the same time they outsourced the HR service center. And so guess what happened when they took the donuts away? Every employee was calling in to complain about the donuts with HR. And literally like the
Poor
first week,
Sanjeev.
you have all these people in India and they had a script, right? They had a script that they were supposed to read. You do understand the caloric content of a donut. And unlike the Apu in The Simpsons, they really didn't know what a donut was. And my point was this: at the same
Oh,
time, when
this
I
is
left
terrible.
Countrywide, so I got into writing. I wrote a 16-page short story called "Welcome to Dane County" because I moved out to Madison, Wisconsin, and United Airlines was terrible at handling my luggage. They lost my luggage, so I'm calling up United Airlines luggage handling, and I realized the person in India has been hired to provide empathy, right? He can't get me my luggage back. And when I do the survey at the end, it asks me, was he attentive? Did he understand the frustration you were feeling? And you couldn't say no to any of these. So you had to give the poor guy a good rating, even though United Airlines was not going to get you back your luggage. So I realized in outsourcing, the principle is outsource that which you're bad at. Now, United Airlines employees had gone through the loss of their pensions, coincidentally, because of the because of the employee owned situation, right? And and United had outsourced their empathy to India, which was good because Indians, they generally have the concept of namaste. They're good at empathy. That was a good outsourcing decision for United Airlines to outsource their empathy and kindness because they didn't have it. The employees were all mad as hell for having lost their pensions in this employee buyout come bankruptcy swindle that happened at United Airlines around the same time. But CFC made a bad outsourcing decision because they were really good at BS. They should have kept the BS in-house instead of outsourcing it to India and expecting the people in India to parlay their BS about taking away the donuts for health reasons. So that was a really bad time at Countrywide when the donuts were taken away, and then everybody knew something's not well here. That was really the beginning of the end inside Countrywide, is when the donuts were taken away.
That's so depressing. That's so depressing. Like, wait, I just need a minute. That's when people knew that not all was what the free donuts were. That's
Right.
so depressing.
Yep.
Was this company run by monkeys on typewriters? Like, I just, in all, and I've watched every movie, I've watched every documentary, I have read 5 books, I have written a whole book, the bulk of which I've compared the 1991 Japanese property crisis to the 2008 crisis. I have spent so much with this subject, and I do not understand how anybody in a position of authority just didn't care.
Well, it's easy to
I don't.
understand when
The mind reels. I just don't understand. You
no,
just the amount of don't give a shit is just stunning.
it's easy to understand when you realize there are some people who are just willing to enrich themselves at the expense of others. And so when they see a clear path big enough to drive a truck through, when you're sitting on top of an opportunity like that of an ever expanding real estate market, in which during that time, and the Fed's money policy as well and everything else, during that time, you're sitting on geese that are laying golden eggs, and it's just too tempting to not take advantage of it. When you're in a position of power and you have the levers, and I can pull this lever here and I can save millions of dollars, I can push that lever there and I can make millions of dollars quickly, easily, at a high margin and at a high rate. It's just unbelievably tempting, which is why I mentioned the whole ecosystem, everybody making that quick buck, nobody thinking systemically about their fellow man and about the havoc that they potentially could be wreaking.
But not only that. I mean, I get people don't think about other people, and I don't expect Countrywide to care about Washington Mutual or anybody else. That's fine. And I realize that in business, everybody's kind of out to get the other guy a little bit. And the goal is to not get got so much.
Right, because
What
it's competition,
it's
right?
competition,
You
right?
need to win market share, you need to win customer satisfaction, you know.
Yes. And I'm saying this as insider baseball for the listener. Wade and I are doing some business together right now that involves a contract. So when I say all of these things, this will be very hilarious for us to talk about later. But that's a little insider baseball. But um, like, and I get all that as an aspect of business, and that's fine. Cool, cool, cool. I'm a business person. I get it. All this type of thing. It's fine. What I don't understand is how these people didn't even care about the long-term sustainabilities of their own businesses. And it was throughout the crisis. The ratings agencies just decided, well, if we don't give them the rating they want, they're going to go down the street. So we're just going to start giving them the rating they want. Well, no, you're not a ratings agency anymore. You're no longer in your core business anymore. That's the
Well,
end of your core business.
and
It's ratings
honestly,
for money now. That's what you're doing. And it seems like that conversation was never had of, was anybody at Countrywide thinking, what does our business look like in 2028? What does our business look like 20 years from now? Is anything that we're doing here sustainable that our children will get to come here and work here?
well, again, at Countrywide, they were that whole hedge strategy around the mortgage servicing rights is one aspect of that. Secondly, having a bank, right? So the people at Countrywide were actually thinking, you know, selfishly, but nonetheless, they were not bad businessmen. And honestly, to me, the most unethical people were really the ratings agencies, right? Their very role was to be the ones who accurately assessed and shared out what the risk was. In one sense, you can't blame Countrywide as much for selling what they had at prices the market would bear as rated by agencies. Now, to the degree that some people knew how fraudulent it was, there were many within Countrywide who didn't know at all because they didn't know the ratings agencies were corrupt. They didn't know that the mortgage or the appraisers were giving false values to the properties. You follow me? There were many who didn't know those other things,
No,
but
I
the
can see that,
ratings
but
agencies.
you can't tell me that there's not anybody. I mean, I get the culpability of the ratings agencies, and the fact that any of them are still in business is an affront to a logical, sensible thinking person. But being that Countrywide was a mortgage originator and understood what the product that they were selling, I refuse to believe that nobody ever said, "Why on earth are we doing stated income loans? Why on
I,
earth are we
I,
believing a hairdresser that says she makes $10,000 a month and we're just sold her a $600,000 house?"
well, and this is
I refuse to believe any one person didn't realize that this probably isn't so great.
the people at the top did. This is why, I was not, I was a first vice president, right? Which is you're
Right.
vice president, then you're promoted once, right? So that was because I did this role in strategic planning and because of where I came from at Deloitte. But because I was in the strategic planning community, I had access to people who knew what was going on with the other business units. And there were, in the end, there were like 14, 16 different business units of Countrywide. And no, because of the separation of these different business units, the average person in Countrywide did absolutely not see the picture of what was actually going on, right? But because I had insight into what was going on in the subprime lending, the wholesale lending, the loan administration department, Countrywide Bank, because I had insight into the strategic plans of these various business units, what they were putting forward, how they were planning to grow, what their goals and objectives were in the strategic planning community, all this had to roll up to one master plan for the company in terms of budgets and goals and hiring and facilities and everything else. Um, so I did have access to information that the average Joe within the company or Sally did not have. But the people at the top, in particular, There was another signpost, and that was when the president was fired by his longtime associate. I'm trying to remember his name right now. Again, this was a number of years ago. He was fired. He was let go. He was the number two guy. That was also a warning sign that all was not well, that risks were being taken, that even the most seasoned executives who had helped build the company were not comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a question then for you to personal level. If you were one of the few people who was able to kind of see the whole picture, and you did figure it out, didn't figure it out, whatever have you, why not say something?
Well, I did, right? So when I was doing my MBA at the
Well, at
time, so I
least
was
that's helpful. That's a good thing.
so I was learning, right? I was learning of this. I was getting an MBA, and therefore those classes were helping me look at things from a different vantage point as well. But
Mm.
when I joined Countrywide, I honestly believed that this was a pathway to financial security for the average American. Investment in real estate, like I said, my dad, myself, investment in real estate was a good thing for the average Joe, for the middle class. Everybody could own a little piece of America, whether it was stock ownership or real estate ownership, and you could tend to your own financial security. This is why and how I joined the company. And this was a successful company doing it well managed. They really were. That's why I say they were good businessmen. It was managed well. Yes, we can joke about some of the stupid things. In any large organization, you're going to have a lot of stupid things. But but then I did my paper on company culture, comparing Countrywide to the mafia. And that was around the time, as you can imagine, when I started saying some things that were not well liked. And I ended up leaving Countrywide and doing an internet startup. And then when I moved to Wisconsin, I worked for CUNA Mutual Group, which is the backbone of the credit union movement, right? Small, locally owned, not for profit financial institutions. Why? Because to me, they were the savior of the economic system. They were the warm blooded mammals that were going to eat the dinosaur eggs. And while there, I learned about the big bank lobbying that goes on in Washington to keep credit unions small, to make sure that they are not a major threat to the existing big power structures in the financial services
Oh no,
industry.
that's why credit unions are regulated in terms of who can be members of them, and they can't cross state borders and all this type of thing. Because the
Thank you.
reality is, if people came along, because I grew up, my family, we came out of the depression in eastern Colorado, so credit unions have been our jam for forever. So I
Yeah.
grew up, I didn't have a bank account at a bank until I was in college, because my parents escaped regular banks years ago and have never looked back.
Well,
And
and
credit unions are
interestingly,
just like, if people found out that there's these institutions that you can own a part of and make decisions that I never go to the board meeting of mine, but I could, all this type of thing. Bank of America would be out of business in 5 years.
well, and
Like,
people
it's a
don't know.
total game changer.
Right. So if you study into the history of the credit union movement, it obviously arose out of the union movement. And there was a
Yes, it
time when
did.
the union movement was not corrupt. People don't know that Labor Day was originally Labor Sunday. And Labor Sunday gives you the moral, spiritual roots of the credit union, or excuse me, of the union movement. And then the credit union movement that grew out of it. And there's a book that I saw when I was at CUNA Mutual Group called "The Debt Shall Die with the Debtor." So there was this goal of not having debt by the end of your life, and if you did, that debt would be retired and not passed on to your children, which gets back to a topic that's of great interest to me. And you know a little bit about this, Cameron, but that's going back to the religious, spiritual roots of economic systems, even as defined by Moses, in which you had land Sabbaths, in which the land was commanded to be left idle and to give it rest. You had commandments to let people glean from the field. So you had to leave something for the people that needed food. But even more importantly, every 7 years, debt was forgiven. And every 49 years, in the year of Jubilee, the land returned to its family owners so that land could not be aggregated over time into a massive holding of one, powerful, rich landlord. So these principles of how to balance an economic system so that we don't have these bust and boom cycles, right? Because what was Countrywide? It was at the center of a massive, gigantic real estate bubble, an inflationary bubble of asset value that is partially, you can look at charts every 50 years or so. You have a massive depression or massive recession. You can look at charts that chart this out, which kind of corresponds to the fact that thousands of years ago, for those who believe that it came from a divine source, there was a commandment that said, hey, debt forgiveness every 7 years. Don't write debts that go beyond 7 years. And even land ownership cannot be passed on for more than 50. So the most you could do is lease the land to somebody else. And then it doesn't return to the state, it returns to the families who have a portion, who have an ownership of that land.
Yes, and that is, I mean, obviously there's many, many flaws in how our economic system works. I have written about them quite extensively. Um, and and that, yes, I mean, there's definitely things to be said about, thinking about things in a different way. Credit unions are great and wonderful things. I think everybody should have one. It's the only piece of financial advice I really give out to people.
Yep.
One of the very, very, very
Sound
first
advice.
yes, one of the very, very, very first things I ever wrote at what would become the Cameron Journal was a piece that was in our best of last year, called The Magic of Credit Unions, where I was as I was beginning my deep dives into economics, I was extolling the virtues of the credit union. Um, and I definitely see, there is, obviously, economically speaking, we have a values conflict in our society in terms of our economic system does not serve our values. It serves the wealth of a very small group of people, but it does not serve the values of society, and it sure as hell doesn't help people as much as it could or as it should. um
I
and
believe
that
in
is difficult at
I believe
best.
in the ability to obtain wealth, but I believe that the extremes of wealth and poverty are a cancer, and that whatever solutions we recommend, the goal should be to limit or eradicate extremes of wealth and poverty.
Yeah, I mean,
They're
it's
obscene. It's obscene, right?
yes, and that's something where I one of the things that I, was have been always frustrated by what happened in 2008 is, and why, there's after asking myself, why on earth could these people let this happen and do this and all this type of thing, I had to come to one inescapable conclusion. Um, and that was because they were making too much money from it.
Right.
That was a very sad moment for me at a personal level. Um, but it was a very important realization, because when you understand that aspect to it and you kind of just boil it down to, yeah, people got greedy. When you get used to the idea, you feel better. You don't in the moment, but down the road you're kind of like, yeah, that actually kind of tracks for how humans operate, sort of thing. um and because there was all these fees to be generated that made money, and with securitization you could make money from nothing, with trading you can make money with no friction, because my thesis with capitalism is not just that capitalism is an entity that we have to pay attention to, but most importantly, capitalism is its ultimate desire is to have a frictionless return, money for nothing. And the drive is always to keep those frictions as low as possible. And so securitization is perfect for capitalism, because you make money from nothing. You don't have to do anything. No facility, if you have a telephone, a laptop, a Bloomberg terminal, and the right licensure, you can go to town. And if you're a bank, you don't have to invest in building a factory and making and selling something. No, no, no. You can put 200 guys with Bloomberg terminals in a room and they can print money all day, every day. And so I get that there's a systemic capitalism thing with all of this. It seems, on the one hand, it seems so very human, but on the other hand, it seems so inhumane.
Well, it begs the bigger question, right? Is how do we counteract the kind of one-dimensional cancerous materialism that leads people to make those decisions, as you mentioned, to where you're not thinking about what it's doing to your soul, your relationships, your family, your tribe, your country in terms of your behavior, right? As long as it's good for me and as long as I'm getting mine, it doesn't matter that this is somehow producing anti-value because the things that we have defined as valuable are being served,
Right.
right? And sadly, we have not defined the right things as being valuable. So the big question is, how do we educate people to have a different set of values in the first place?
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, as I just said, the economy is not serving the things that we hold in value. It's doing very good at making a very small group of people very wealthy. Yeah, you have to decide what your priorities as a society are going to be. What do you hold? What are your values? What are your ethics? What do you put above everything else? I think one of the great crimes of the 21st century is how people convinced everybody that society was screwing them over and they would be better on their own, making their own way, getting their own wealth, not realizing that by breaking people up and atomizing them, it completely neutralized any power they would ever have for the rest of their lives. In my mind, like, with the election of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, the Anglophone world made a terrible trade. We traded the ability to make money faster through less regulations and all this type of thing. And in exchange, we forfeited all political power, basically, and we forfeited any ability to have any control over our own lives. And the only question I have to like my parents is, was the money worth it? Please tell me the money was worth it, because it will take my generation, the rest of our lives, to begin to undo what you did. We will not finish this work in our lifetimes, to begin to undo what you did. And that's supposing we can get these idiots out of power fast enough to get the job done. Um, it's it was a terrible, terrible, terrible trade. And I see so many people that are just kind of like, well, I was able to buy my council house thanks to Margaret Thatcher. Okay, but now the UK has a housing problem, and I have people like be kind of like, okay, yeah, my dad bought a house for basically no money in
Well,
1994. He's gonna hawk the fucker for $500,000. And but I will never own a house until they die, maybe. And it's like, please tell me it was worth it, because if it wasn't, we have made really terrible mistakes and we need to go to a corner and have a think about it.
I think in terms of making better decisions, right? Understanding history is really important because
I agree.
what's the way I would look at this is that the decisions that were made, were first time unique decisions. The United States of America was really a grand experiment at this federalistic approach of an aggregation of what used to be nation states, right? When we think about the term the United States of America, what does that compare to? Well, it compares to the states of Europe, which were not united, right? The reason I bring this out is that a state equals a nation. So we established on this continent 50 nations that all agreed to cooperate and create a federal government. So,
I tell Europeans that and it breaks their brain. I'm like, you have to understand, we're not a country. What we are is 50 different little countries that all happen to live under the same roof, and we kind of sort of all move together like a school of fish. And I'm like, so if you want to know why we have 50 different ways of doing everything and we have no national standards for this shit like you all do, is because we're really 50 small countries that just happen to all live in the same house.
well, and
We're
they've
50
been working
uncomfortable roommates.
they've been working to try to create what the United States created, but they're coming at it, in the way that if you go to a European city, the streets were built for horses, right? And you can't get a car in there. So
Right.
it's much more difficult to retool everything. That's what they've been trying to do, and that's why they have Brexit now, right? Because Great Britain pulling out of it. But the point I'm making is this: that the scale, the aggregate scale of what your parents and my generation and those that slightly came before me, my dad's generation, I'm kind of sort of in between the generation actually, on the edge of two. But my point is, the decisions that were made were based on the information, the understanding available at the time, in a new experiment of an aggregated scale of global dominance and power, as well as American ingenuity to create these industries and this mass production that was producing and spreading wealth in ways that had never before been experienced on the planet. So you have to cut them a little bit of slack for not making the best decisions. The question is, will the next generation and the one after that and the one after that actually fix things, or will they make it worse? Right? Because the decisions are complex and difficult, as we see, and the science that we're developing, whether it be in economics, healthcare, whatever area of science we're in the infancy of being able to deal with these large scale complex problems of a global civilization of 7-8 billion people. And
I
you
mean,
get
I,
it
I
wrong
do,
and there are catastrophic
yeah.
consequences.
I do think it is difficult to I mean, I think it is difficult because I firmly believe this. I think a lot of people of my parents' generation did not understand how the reforms of the New Deal made their economic success possible. They didn't they had not been through the depression and the war. They didn't understand what it was like when commodity prices were so low there was no food in cities. People were
Right.
starving. They
Yep.
that had was by the time they
Exactly.
came along, that had all been fixed and papered over, and their parents said we are never going to do that ever again, and their parents worked their collective butts off to make sure it never happened again. So the boomers didn't have a clue. And so they and
Yeah.
and at some point they just decided, yeah, we like money. We went to India, we discovered our third eye, and we came home and decided money was the thing we needed. And it seems to me that they were willing to sacrifice absolutely everything in the service of mammon, to use a religious term about it.
No,
And
amen to
yeah,
that.
and that is, I think, one of the just, I mean, you just kind of look at that and you're kind of like, I mean, I agree. I think people didn't know, you can't know what you don't know, to quote Donald Rumsfeld. Um, but that we're just gonna pull that 20-year ago
Unknown,
reference out.
unknown. Well, yeah, yeah.
The unknown
Unknown,
unknowns.
unknown. Right.
Yes. Uh, I just it's you can't know you don't know what you don't know, but it also seems like greed was at work.
Absolutely.
And
Uh,
people didn't care that greed was at work because their options were going up and their bank accounts were getting more full and their
right.
real estate prices were going up.
Well,
And so
and getting
who
back,
cares?
getting back
Everyone's
to
being greedy. We're
getting back
making
to
money.
getting back to Countrywide and all that. So my undergrad degree is in theology, and I went to Europe with a suitcase and a one-way ticket when I graduated from college because my goal was to be different. I didn't want to make money. But then, of course, as the Apostle Paul talks about, for those who are married, they have the cares of the world and they have to care for their wife. I had a family and I wanted to take care of my family. and you feel a responsibility to make sure that your kids, as Billy Joel said, every kid had a pretty good shot to get at least as far as his old man got. But something happened on the way to that place. They threw an American flag in our face, right? From Allentown. Great song, Allentown. Anyway, the point is, I wanted to go and be different and not pursue that. But then in the end, as you get a little older, you're like, well, crap. I need a place to sleep. I need to make sure I can have food on the table. I don't want to be out there begging, right? And then it's easy to get caught up. But the whole time I was at Countrywide, I tried to keep that vision of, are we building something good? Are we building something healthy? Is this really helping American middle class families get their fair little piece of the American dream? But then you're in there and you see, and it's just a fatted calf and it's being slaughtered and people are dancing around the golden calf, right? And it's really, really hard to find and maintain that balance.
No, it is. I think I share the frustration of many other people. And I was rewatching a Frontline documentary the other night um about this, and out of all of that, nobody went to jail. Well, one guy did. One small guy from Credit Suisse went to jail. Um
That is the tragedy. That is the real tragedy. And if people are not held accountable, then the saying goes, can you blame them? And
yeah.
yes, you can, but you kind of should expect that more people are going to follow that pattern.
Well, yes, and that's the sad state of affairs, is that now we've gotten rid of mortgage-backed securities, and we now call it bespoke mortgage products, or whatever new name they've come up with. And they're doing the same thing all over again, and housing prices are even worse now at terrible interest rates, because the Fed's trying to tamp down inflation. And I think for me, like, I get the whole, as you get older, you want to have more stability and financial security, and living from pillar to post is not fun. I'm a full-time working artist. If there's anybody who understands that transition, even for just myself, because Lord knows I will never marry and I will never have children, the um I get that, even just for my own self. I see that, sure, absolutely. One of that's one of the things I'm working on in my business right now, is figuring out how to make this more sustainable, so I am not wondering, oh, am I going to make enough money this week to pay the electric bill? No, no. I get all of that. I get all of that. I guess I just struggle with the just the wanton deregulation that made all of this possible, for no other reason than a few people were. It's not that they weren't making any money at all, they weren't making enough money. It's kind of like,
Well,
it's like, oh, it's like, you guys are grown up in the greatest prosperity to ever hit humanity in human history, and you want to deregulate because it's not that you're not making money, you're not making enough money. And that's when we get back to avarice and greed. It's like we're, and even with Louis Ranieri inventing mortgage-backed securities, you did this so that you could reduce the risk of mortgages to make more money.
yeah.
And I think for
I
me, it's just kind of like, my generations were never going to have that opportunity. We'll spend our whole lives cleaning up from the avarice and greed of people that came before us. We will never have that opportunity to do that well for ourselves, ever. It's not coming. Ever. If the pandemic didn't prove that, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's not
no,
coming. And I think that's very, it's a very, as someone who has to live with this for the next 30 to 40 years, it's hard to have hope for the future.
as a species across the whole planet, we're dealing with the fact that our entire way of life across all the cultures is not delivering what people really want and need,
Mm,
if they understand it properly, nor sustainability, right? And so it's
certainly.
the real estate bubble may have popped, but the big gigantic human species bubble has not yet popped, right? And that's coming, and there's more pain coming. And I will just say one thing, and I know we're out of time and I have to run too, but
Yes.
the one thing I would say is that the idea of a free market versus a regulated market, those are just useful words that can help begin the discussion, but they are not good if we think of them as real. There's no such thing as a free market because the definition of a market is the creation of regulations that would enable or create a market of any kind. So you can't, free market is an oxymoron, it's an illusion. And overregulation does do as much damage as deregulation. So in there somewhere is a balance. There's a Goldilocks compromise between freedom and regulation. And again, at scale, when you start to get it wrong and you start to meddle with it, the consequences, the unintended consequences are enormous. It's
No, that
and that's what
is.
we've got to figure out as a species, and we need to come together and talk about it, not let one viewpoint gain dominance and then proceed to drive us off a cliff.
I think that's an excellent way to end. We normally do plugs at the very end, but I know you plugged a book earlier. Do you want to mention it one more time so people can go pick that up?
Sure, I've written a trilogy actually. The first one is called The People of the Sign, which gets into those religious roots. The second volume is called The Hardness of the Heart, which gets into really reckoning with the religious belief, midlife crisis, what has and hasn't worked, and then the final volume is called The Rod of Iron, which sort of wraps it up and tries to answer some of the questions from a big space time perspective. Gets into quantum physics and all that fun stuff to try to basically help us understand that we human beings, each individual, we are the quantum particles at the emergence of consciousness. We have free choice. We are the free radicals. We are the ones who can behave erratically, right? Whereas every other species below us doesn't have a choice. They behave the way they're going to behave. We are the emerging quantum particle at the level of consciousness, and the choices that we make really do matter.
Very good, very good. Social media, where can people find you online? And then we'll get you out of here.
They can find me on Facebook. They can find those books on Amazon. Strangely, I'm the only Wade Fransson in the Googleverse. Doesn't seem like an unusual name, but if you Google me, you will find me. I cannot hide.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you. It's been a joy, and I hope to hook up with you again very soon.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.